front pages of the papers today, all talking about the COVID vaccine, which could offer 90% protection of the people that are going to get it. It's been described as a great day for science and humanity.
Well, here to explain more about when we can expect the vaccine to be rolled out is Professor Paul Hunter, an infectious diseases expert from the University of East Anglia, and Dr Philippa as well. Good morning to both of you. So, this is incredible news. Obviously, we're very excited about it here. We're trying to get a lid on it somewhat, but this is more hopeful. It's meant to be 90% effective. So are we right to have hope here, Paul?
Absolutely. I think many of us were not expecting anywhere close to 90% effectiveness. And if the vaccine had been only 50% effective, then we would have still undoubtedly gone ahead with it. But 90% is remarkably good. But do remember, this is preliminary results. One mustn't really get too excited about companies' press releases. What you really need to see is the real data. But if that data holds up and if it remains the case in the final analysis, then this will be a major step forward, particularly as it's stopping infection and not just, as we feared early on that vaccines might do, is stopping people getting severe illness. So it's actually stopping the infection. So very good news.
I understand the need for restraint, but you'll excuse me if I'm actually really quite internally very excited here and refuse to stop, just for the time being. So obviously this is going to take a while, seriously, Paul, isn't it? And so, but if this does do what we're hoping it's going to do, and it does live up to the expectations, does this mean the beginning of the end of the pandemic?
Yes, but that's not going to happen in the next few months. Even if the vaccine gets emergency approval later on this month and then gets rolled out early next year, most of us who are going to get the vaccine will probably not be getting the vaccine until February, March time. So for this winter, I think we've got to carry on as though we don't have a vaccine coming, but hopefully by the time we come to spring now and many of our more vulnerable people are immunised, then I think we can start to relax.
There was
Although,
talk.
sadly, the virus isn't going to go away anytime soon, even with a vaccine, but at least we won't see the same amount of mortality.
But you talk about February, March there, and some people are saying that the most vulnerable amongst our communities and society here would expect, and although there's 3 weeks between the two necessary vaccines, they are talking about pre-Christmas in some cases.
Absolutely. Jonathan Van Tam, the Deputy CMO, yesterday said he hopes that we would have some vaccinations out before Christmas, but no, only a relatively small proportion of the totality of people that we want to vaccinate. So yes, some people will get the vaccine hopefully before Christmas, although that does depend on the data passing the regulators' approval.
So, Dr Philippa, nice to see you. Who counts as being vulnerable then? If this does get rolled out, who will receive it first?
So we think that it will be the very elderly, because those are the people who are most at risk. So it will probably be people who live in care homes and care home workers initially, because those can be hotbeds of infection, as we saw early on in the pandemic. And then it is suggested that it would probably be over 85s and then over 80s, over 75s, and we work our way down. And we're going to include those vulnerable people with high risk conditions, and of course NHS workers, because we don't want asymptomatic spreaders spreading the condition. So we're going to have to work our way down systematically, and it's going to be a while before the general population, the sort of under 50s, have it. But as soon as we start protecting our most vulnerable, that means that we can open up and open up. And from a psychological point of view, every milestone that we hit when it comes to a vaccine is really positive and something to hang on to.
And just listening to the news yesterday, obviously I think many of us were glued to it because it was something that looked reasonably positive. It looks like it's pretty tricky to administer, doesn't it? Sort of old style administering, and also it has to be kept incredibly cold.
Incredibly cold.
Sorry, over to you.
So lots of us have had experience of going to the GP flu clinic, when you're in and out in a few minutes. And those flu vaccines are single vial vaccines. So they're individual vaccines. We keep them in our fridge, use one, and away we go. Now, this vaccine needs to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius. That is colder than a fridge. That is colder than your freezer, and that is colder than most GP surgeries have. And it's then not a single-use vaccine. And it's going to be delivered in containers that contain up to 1,000 to 5,000 doses. And those doses will then have to be drawn up and diluted. And that means that they're going to need to be checked. So 2 people are going to be involved in the delivery of that. And then you're going to probably have to wait for about 15 minutes in the surgery because it's a new vaccine and we want to check that everything is okay. And so it's probably not going to be as simple as popping along to your local GP surgery. At the moment, we're thinking that it's going to be delivered in sort of more central hubs so that we can not waste any of this precious vaccine. So we're going to do it, but the delivery is a bit tricky at the moment.
And Paul, how long do we think that the vaccine might last? If you're one of these lucky few that gets it, how long will you have immunity for?
Well, we don't know at the moment. I suspect, I would be very surprised if it doesn't last at least a year. It's quite plausible that this is a vaccine that for some time at least we'll be having to have every year, but maybe when we've got the results in a year's time, we'll maybe be able to say, well, actually, it lasts a bit longer than a year. We'll be able to extend that out. But at the moment, I think we don't know. So assume that you'll have to have this every year. And if it lasts longer than that, that's a bonus.
And Paul, what were you going to say about the distribution and administering of this?
I think Philippa just said everything that I was going to say.
Oh, well, there you go. That's lucky she jumped in there.
Scientists that are aligned?
Yeah,
this is unheard of.
We're loving that. So, Philippa, both of you, in fact, because it's about numbers, what percentage, do we know what percentage of the British population are at most risk?
Now we're both silent as we're waking up.
You, Philippa.
So it depends what you would be looking at. The percentage of the population that's over 85, the percentage of the population that's over 80, or the percentage of the population with high-risk diseases, and I think that each of those will have a separate answer. So it's a bit difficult to say. We have ordered 40 million doses. That's 20 million people, and that really should be enough to cover our most high-risk patients. Remember, of course, that although we sort of think, oh, you know, I'm 41 or however old you are and I don't have a high-risk condition, I'm going to be last in the queue. And that's because for most of us, coronavirus is still a very mild illness. And that's why we have to protect the vulnerable who are at most risk of becoming unwell or unfortunately even dying from the disease. And that's why it's going to be done in that order. But if I could also just reassure people, because I know there's so much concern about the safety of a vaccine and concerns of would I even have it even if I am eligible? And the answer is this. There are 2 things that matter when it comes to a vaccine. Number 1, does it work? Number 2, is it safe? And those regulations are really, really, really stringent. And if we are passing the stages of the trial, we can be assured that not only is it working, but that it's also safe at the same time.
Paul, what do you say to the vaccine deniers?
I think I would say really think again, look at the science, look at the evidence, consider what you would feel if you didn't have the vaccine and your family didn't have the vaccine and one of you sadly died from COVID. It is a serious disease. The vaccine will not just be, when it does come to market, it isn't going to just come to market and then we'll be grateful it's done and not worry about it. There's going to be a huge amount of post-implementation surveillance to look for any rare adverse effects. And that will be made very clear very early. But yeah, I do encourage everybody, unless they have particular reasons that are medical reasons where they can't have vaccine, and there are some of these,
Can I-
that they do present themselves for vaccination.
Can I just ask you one final question? Bearing in mind, in March, the planet ended up somewhere we'd never been before. And you have these incredible scientific minds, the people at Pfizer coming together and all the other individuals, because this isn't the only vaccine that we're looking at. There are others lined up as well, hopefully. So what have we... I'm assuming that where we are now, we have learnt a lot to act faster, to act with greater knowledge and greater clarity, should this ever happen again.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
And,
it's really important that
we
an mRNA vaccine, which is this kind of vaccine, that we can really respond to changes in the virus. Now, all viruses mutate, it's what they do. And this new technology actually means that we should be able to respond to any changes really quickly. In March, I sat on that sofa and I said, normally a vaccine is 15 years in development. To be moving so quickly is utterly incredible.
And Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. And we do know a lot more about the virus than we did in March. But I think one of the key things we know is that at the moment, we still can't give up on our social distancing, at least until early mid next year, because it will take that long for enough people to have the vaccine to sufficiently suppress the risk of dying. And so it is good news, but it's not going to be a big thing for at least a few months before we can start relaxing.
Thank you both.
Thank you both.
Very much indeed. Thank you.